Society and Social Studies into a unit on slavery. So we began the unit, launched it with a series of picture books, just reading the picture books, and the children had different graphic organizers to respond to the different books. I just wanted to see what their level of information was on slavery, which I think we all were discussing. It was very low. They really didn't understand the whole slavery unit. And then I also showed a very edited version of Roots, part 1 and part of part 2. And that really elicited a lot of responses, very emotional responses from the kids, because they really had no idea how slaves were first captured. So that kind of launched our unit. Then we also, our chapter book that we read was Runaway to Freedom, if any of you are familiar with that, which also, touches more on the Underground Railroad, but also the conditions under which that they live. We also read from the slave narratives, true stories in the 1930s. This is a project taken on to document those surviving slaves and document stories either firsthand or of their parents. And so we read quite a few of those so they can use the primary documents to find out exactly what it was like, from a firsthand point of view. After we had watched Roots and talked about it, we had the children write poetry, which, again, like Elaine was saying, it's just the poetry that comes out of them is just amazing. These are 5th graders, and things that I couldn't write. And it's just very, very touching. So you can see that they really are starting to assimilate what this information is meaning, and that it's really happened to real people. And in our school, we don't have very many African Americans. So for them to relate, it's very difficult. And I think now they're beginning to look at it in a different way. We also had the abolitionist cards. When we started talking about abolitionists and who were abolitionists, and from this program, I was talking to them that it's not necessarily just white people were abolitionists, but a lot of the African Americans were very involved. And with these cards, they were able to choose one, and then they had to make a poster and write about their abolitionists and tell the class about them. This one I put on, I just like this, William Lloyd Garrison, because he was a famous newspaper editor. She wrote his story as if it's a newspaper. He's holding the newspaper. So, and then we used an activity where I gave them each, they're working with a partner, a runaway slave ad, and they had to read the ad. There are some questions I had, basic, right there questions. Who was the slave, how old, from where were they running? But they also had to do a lot of inferring. Why were they running the day before Christmas? Was it because the plantation was having lots of celebration they could leave, or had they just found out they were about to be sold and that's why they would leave during the snow and things like that? So they kind of learned a lot that way. And then also their clothing too. Quite a few of these ads discussed much more about what they were wearing than actually what they looked like, which showed that either the master didn't know what they looked like, or the master was more interested in getting back his property, his materials, than the actual slave. Then after that, after they filled this out, they had to then write a slave ad as if they were the runaway slave and their master was writing about them. And those are actually quite comical. This little girl wrote that $2 reward for her, runaway slave girl, ran from Charleston, South Carolina, 11 years old, hyper, clever, and sassy in nature. So I love that, which she really is. So, she does, yes. And then we just watched this week Ruby Bridges, the story of Ruby Bridges, and we kind of compared Ruby Bridges to Kintu Kunte from Roots, even though they're 200 years apart, just to see what these two children, their feelings and what they went through, and similarities, compare and contrast. So that is my unit.